I just wanted you to see today that the basis for all Christian giving is first the giving of God and the generous giving of his son, Jesus Christ. And that's the motivation. I respond to him in my giving. There are three things about the cross that parallel your giving and my giving of our money to the Lord. I'll use three words. The cross was completely voluntary, completely voluntary. He wasn't commanded by the Father to go to the cross. He did it of his own will. He did it saying, Father, not my will, but yours be done. And he voluntarily went to the cross for me. Now, in these chapters on giving, he's going to draw, Paul, a direct line from that to your giving and mine. And he says it's completely voluntary. It's not commanded. He doesn't command them to give, and we don't command you to give either. It ought to be because your heart is moved by the Lord. Completely voluntary. In fact, in verse 8 of this same chapter, he says, I'm not commanding you to give, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. He's a character, Paul. What he's really doing is he's saying this. You can read the chapters. He says, I was up in Macedonia, and the Christians up there, they gave a lot of money. So now Paul comes to Corinth, and rather than just going straight in and saying, I need your money, oh, by the way, these guys up in Macedonia, they gave a lot of money. Now, the Corinthians were very competitive people. They would have said, hey, wait a minute. Well, we can do better than that. That's what Paul was hoping they would do. But he wanted it to be voluntary. And then the second word was sacrificial. When you look at the cross, you get that, don't you? I mean, there's no way you can calculate percentages when you look at the cross. He gave it all. He gave himself freely, sacrificially. And it's so interesting when Paul talks to the Corinthians about this other group of Christians in Macedonia. Listen to what he says about them. He says, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. That's crazy stuff. You're used to me saying we have a need, or you might be used to other people in my position begging for money. That's not what Paul says happened here. The Macedonian Christians, they begged Paul to give. I think Paul was saying, hang on. You guys are too poor to give. There's so much month at the end of the money. You can't afford this. And they said, who cares? We're going to give. That was the Macedonian Christians. And Paul says, out of their extreme poverty, they gave. What does that mean? Has to mean it was sacrificial. Because extreme poverty means crushing poverty. These people were crushed by life, like so many people today. Yet they still begged Paul for the privilege of giving. It was sacrificial. It was sacrificial. And then the third word is symbolic. Symbolic. There's more in the cross of Jesus than meets the eye. It's not just the death of someone on a cross. In the cross, what's symbolic is the love of God. You can't miss it. For God so loved the world. It was the greatest display of God's love for us when he gave up his own son. There's so much more in the cross. There's so much more in your giving money than meets the eye, than just as money to pay bills or to support a missionary, whatever. There's so much more. You know what's more? For one, it's a very practical expression of your thanks to God for all that he's done for you. I read that in chapter 9. It says this service, meaning the offering, that you perform is not only supplying the needs of God's people, but is also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. How can I repay God for all he's done? Paul says, here's a practical way. Just as you give, that's an expression of your gratitude to God for all he's done for you. There's so much more in it. It's part of our worship. It's a declaration of our trust in God. I can actually give this and let it go because my real security is God who, if he takes care of birds and lilies, he knows how to take care of me and my family. So it's an expression of trust. So I think as you sort of walk through these chapters, and we'll get practical, a lot more practical next week, but I just wanted you to see today that the basis for all Christian giving is first the giving of God and the generous giving of his son, Jesus Christ. And that's the motivation. I respond to him in my giving. And as his giving was voluntary, sacrificial, and symbolic, so was mine meant to be. So maybe to wrap this up, to say that generous giving is so central to our Christian lives. It starts by loving God first and then being good stewards of all he's given to us.